You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
All right, and welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and I'm joined, as always, by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight? Yes, sir.
It's about that time. No, doing pretty good, man. I've actually been enjoying the NHL playoffs, even though the Avalanche are no longer in it. Although it has been a little bit harder to watch from my point of view. So I did divulge into the Nuggets a little bit, and I have enjoyed their series with the Suns. And anytime you sweep the Lakers is a good day. So I have been rooting for the home team and kind of enjoying the experience of that, at least. So other than that, the news and notes, doing some rookie drafts, finishing up this best ball draft. We're on week number 3. Is this 3 or is this the full week number 2? Is that what this is?
No, this is week 3 because a couple weeks ago we made picks on the air, and last week it wasn't on us when we were doing it. So yeah, we're like full on 3 weeks in.
Yeah, so we're a round and a half away from finishing that thing up finally. And then I'm sure I have some others here coming up on the docket as we get ready. But it's been good. I've been pretty happy with my rookie drafts so far. It definitely gets a little thin in the 4th round. Like, you kind of have your guy that you're going after, and if he gets picked, I've been kind of struggling in that 4th round of rookie drafts. But nonetheless, here we are. It's Tuesday night. I get to hang out with you guys, so I'm doing pretty damn good.
Yeah, I will echo that, and I appreciate you guys holding down the fort last week without me while I was off on my little mini moon. I think that's what we've called it. Got married, the NHL playoffs have been wildly entertaining for as much of a stinker as the second round was. Right, there's a ton of blowouts in each game. Like this conference finals round has been a lot of fun. I think all but 2 of the games have gone to overtime, and I think the game that was just played was like the first multi-goal margin, because even the game that Florida won to go up 3-0 was a 1-0 win. What was that, last night, I guess?
Yeah, 6 goals in 3 games, and they're up 3-0.
Yeah, wild, just absolutely wild. Bob Bobrovsky is going to steal, I think, maybe a cup, just like Jonathan Quick did with the Kings 2 seasons, when they won. So all it takes is a hot goalie that is playing out of his flipping mind, and that seems to be what Sergei Bobrovsky is right now. I also started to get into the NBA playoffs, and I shouldn't say the NBA playoffs. I was watching the Nuggets games casually, and it's fun. It's fun, like the Nuggets they're in uncharted territory now. First time in franchise history they've made the NBA Finals. I think that was the first time they swept anybody in the playoffs. So what a time to do it! Yeah. So what a great time to do it in the Western Conference Finals. I don't know how they'll match up against either team that comes out of the East, but I don't know that I'll actively seek out those games, but if they're on, I'll try to watch them.
Next Thursday.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like a 9-day layoff. That is wild.
Well, Boston came back, won their first game in that series, having been down 3-0. So now it's 3-1, and we see that series continue to play out there. But it does give me pause, though. I don't know if you guys remember this, but 9 days happened to be the same amount of time. Granted, completely different sports, but 9 days was the same amount of time that the Rockies had off in 2007 as they were awaiting whoever was coming out of the American League. And we saw how well that went for them. Actually, same I think
didn't the
scenario.
Avs have a massive layoff last year after they swept Edmonton before the Stanley Cup Finals?
Yeah. But, and again, different sports. Not baseball. You need that timing and everything, right?
Well, not only that, you had the Red Sox that came back and won, in historic fashion, coming down.
They were down 3-1.
They were down 3-0 and came back 1-4 straight on that one there, and just became the hot team. Like the Rockies that season were super hot heading into the playoffs and just continued that and then had that bit of a layoff there. But I think that you're going to end up having that, both cases there, unless Boston comes back and wins 4 straight, which again has never happened in NBA history either there. But and I think if we're we're all Nuggets fans here, and I think we're hoping that Miami wins that, because then Denver has home court advantage here in the playoffs or in the finals here, and Denver's a tough out at home. At altitude, all arena gets raucous. So I think that we'd rather see them get 4 games at home than get 4 games that they got to go on the road and do that. Although sweeping the Lakers, no problems there, and swept the Lakers even with Anthony Davis putting up like a 40-point game, LeBron James putting up a 40-point game, did not matter. So
that was pretty impressive, pretty darn impressive, and honestly, after game 1. You kind of saw like, oh, the Nuggets built up this big lead, and then it was just like, man, the Lakers, they're still just kind of hanging around. And then, Denver hung on and won that game, and you were like, okay, maybe, right? Like that's a game that they probably, at least in years past when I've been watching the Nuggets, that's a game they lose, right? And that wasn't the case this year. So that's kind of nice. It's fun. I hope the city's enjoying it. I hope that it's creating some buzz around the state down there, and taking over for the fact that the other tenant of Ball Arena made an early exit. Although I guess the Mammoth are in the
are in the finals again. They are in the finals again. They were the champions last year. Back in the finals again this year. Kroenke,
Ball Arena, House of Champions.
Yeah, Kroenke just manages to produce championship sports franchises. Apparently,
how the Rapids doing? That's a Kroenke team, isn't it?
I don't know, but what was it? The Rams won the Super Bowl. The Avs won. The Mammoth won last year. The Mammoth and the Nuggets are back in the finals this year. So
we need Kroenke to buy the Rockies.
if he could, please. Stanley, get on the phone with the old Mumford boys and see what you can work out.
Exactly. Jamie chiming in here real quick saying, thanks for making my night better with your live. Absolutely. That's what we're here to do, Jamie. Is put smiles on people's faces and provide that fantasy knowledge there. So any other thoughts before we start kind of getting into this and breaking some of these things down? Any news notes, anything like that we need to talk about?
The Broncos, minor, but the Broncos cut Brandon McManus today. They They do not have a kicker on the active roster.
Last player from the Super Bowl team. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. The problem with kickers in the NFL is that you are a victim of your own success, right? Because there are plenty of people who can make field goals, right? Like there are plenty of big legs out there, and whether or not you're accurate is a completely different thing. But you start to, become one of the better ones, then you start to command more money. Well, teams aren't really willing to dedicate that much money to a kicker. So,
not when he has his worst season since his rookie year.
Right. Yeah. So like he became kind of a product of his own success, and then obviously having the down year last year. But it's a pretty sad thing, I guess. Like that's it for the last of the Super Bowl Mohicans.
Absolutely. This comment here made me giggle while we were talking about that, so we're going to talk about. So Jamie says we're talking dribble ball. Keep looking at the stats of NBA and seeing there's multiple field goals, but never see anybody kick a ball in the hoop.
That's good stuff.
That's
high quality dad joke, Jamie. That's high quality dad joke.
A+.
LeBron tried last night in his pouting fashion.
Actually, he would have been better off had he tried to punt that thing in on those last 2 field goals. He probably would have gotten closer.
Honestly,
would have actually gotten the shot off.
It made up for the lob that he tried to throw. It was at the end of the first quarter.
Yes.
And it
just went in.
It just kind of all equaled out a little bit. Like, what the hell?
If we're being honest, though, that looks like every Nikola Jokic 3-pointer.
but Nikola Jokic is repeatable. And repeatable
right.
On that.
I understand, but the technique was the same. It's the
old Larry Bird. It's the old Larry Bird, and he made a career out of doing it too. So, anyway, go Nuggets.
Right. That's right. All right, foosball. What we got coming up here tonight, Derek?
All right, so tonight we're gonna hit up the Raiders, the Falcons, and what was the last team there? The Saints. We're going to hit up the Raiders, Falcons, and Saints, breaking these teams down here. So we got 3 teams on the docket ready to lock and load here. Alex has got some questions for us at the end of it, talking a little bit of dynasty, talking about, kind of getting prepared for the season, some of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to hit that up. Make sure you're hitting all those socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, at Good Old Boys FF. And again, head over to the YouTube channel, click that subscribe button. Best way to help this independent podcast. Let's go ahead and start getting into it here. We got the Raiders first up on the docket here. 6-11 last year, 58% pass, 42% run. They ranked 12th in points for and 11th in total yards for head coach Josh McDaniels and offensive coordinator Mick Lombardi. We're going to start in the running back room where we always do. Josh Jacobs finished RB3 for fantasy last year, 340 rush attempts, 1,653 yards, 12 touchdowns, 53 receptions, 46 targets, 400 yards, 0 TDs. Thoughts on Josh Jacobs?
So last year, RB3. The year before, it was a turd, right? I mean, this is the problem. I think he still finished like RB12 or something like that. But, he is a top 10 RB, and he got a franchise tag. I believe he signed, so we're good there with him showing up. So it's basically another contract year. So I like Josh Jacobs this year. I don't know if top 3 is necessarily where he's going to end up, but I do believe he is safely within the top 10 and a very good second round pick. So numbers, 340 carries. I haven't gotten that far down the list yet. I'm trying to think. I guess I wouldn't be overly surprised if he matches that total. I don't think he's going over necessarily because I don't think the Raiders are going to have a big enough lead in a lot of games to be able to do more. But the offense does really kind of float through him. And now with Jimmy G commanding the offense there, he is not a guy who you're going to have drop back and throw the ball 35, 40 times a game. So that means more running game, which means more Josh Jacobs. So this is going to be my swan song with him, just because last time I endorsed him, he killed me 2 years ago. And then last year I was out on him and he went RB3. So I'm back on the bandwagon. I'm, giving my support behind Josh Jacobs. And I think for the value that you get in the second round, he is a prime candidate of go Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson in the first round, turn around in the second round if you can, and pick up Josh Jacobs. And you have yourself one heck of a 1-2 punch if you're able to swing your draft that way in single quarterback leagues.
Yeah, so Here was the interesting thing about, this is the Raiders as a whole, but it does pertain to Josh Jacobs in terms of, his usage, right? Like the Raiders were in a ton of close games last year. I mean, you go back and look at their schedule and a lot of these games were 1-score games or went to overtime. They went to overtime 4 times. Right. So these were close games that they were playing in. And those are games where you're going to utilize the run game a lot because they were still playing to win and you want to stay balanced and you're not necessarily chasing points as much as you normally would be when you'd be throwing the football a lot more when you're doing that. So the Raiders were in a lot of close games. Sure, they lost 11 of them, but like they were in a lot of close games. And I think that's where Josh Jacobs got a lot of his use was because those games were close and you still needed to maintain, some level of balance offensively. Couple that with the fact that Derek Carr had some new weapons, right? Davante Adams coming over, that helped, kind of ease the burden and not allow teams to stack the box against Josh Jacobs, where I think that he was a benefactor of a lot of outside influences. But I also, there's no denying that, he made the most of what he got. I mean, he was the high rusher for the Raiders every game except for the last one. And the last one was Jarrett Stidham, right? Like that was the after the car situation happened. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm necessarily in on Josh Jacobs this year, but I do think that I wouldn't be upset if I do that strategy, right, Kevin? That pick up that top end wide receiver in the first round and then turn around and grab a Josh Jacobs there in the second round. Like, that's fine by me. But I do think you have to be committed to going that route. And I don't know. Man, I'm just so torn on what this Raiders team is going to be this year that I just don't know if I'm like all in on getting Josh Jacobs.
Well, I think the other way to spin that is he could always be your second RB, right? Depending on
right.
If you're at the back end of the first round and you pair up, like Nick Chubb. If you're back in the first round, like Nick Chubb and Josh Jacobs, like you could do that too, but it doesn't work. Like, to me, it doesn't work if you do like a tight end. If you go Kelsey, if you go Kelsey and then Jacobs, I don't know that has the same appeal, even with Kelsey's dominance at that tight end position. And if you go, further down the line, right? Because a lot of these drafts have anywhere from 4 to 6 wide receivers going in the first round. Like, I don't even know if I like it as much with like a Tyreek Hill or even a Cooper Kupp. Like, I don't know if I like it even that much. Like, I want either Jefferson or Chase, and then I will go with Jacobs being my top back. Otherwise, I want to get it on the turn, maybe go double running back, have Jacobs as my number 2, and then load up on wide receiver as I go down the draft board. So there's a couple different ways to play it that I think could ease your hesitation on it, right, and still be able to do it. But I guess overall, nonetheless, he's gonna go in the second round. Like, you are not going to pick up Josh Jacobs in the third round of a redraft, a single quarterback redraft.
Yeah.
So, if you believe the fact that he's going to duplicate said numbers, and 12 touchdowns is hard to duplicate, but I do think that he can get to 9 or 10, and then maybe he does squeak in one through the air or right through receiving, and you kind of balance that out because Jimmy G will check the ball down. So chances are he'll get some extra receptions. So what you might lose in touchdowns, you will pick up in a PPR format, because I think he'll end up with another, 10 to 15 grabs over what he had last year. And if he falls into the end zone once out of the air, it balances itself out a little bit that way. So it's just, different ways of kind of looking at it. But I still think if he's going off the board at RB9, I think is roughly where he's going off right now. I think that's a pretty safe floor. And I think the ceiling is, again, that RB3, type position. I don't see him being the top of the running back class, but I could see him with very, very strong numbers and getting some good value there for a top end back.
Right. And where I've seen him come off the board a lot is kind of anywhere in that RB6 to RB10 type of range, right? Like, you're going to see him come off the board kind of right there, tail end of the first, beginning of the second. You're going to be hard pressed to see him fall back into like the late second. You may even be hard pressed to see him fall back into the mid second type of thing. So, that's one of those that he will be gone early into the second in just about every draft that you're looking at there. And for good reason, right? There was only one running back that saw more opportunities on the ground than he did last year. It was Derrick Henry, right? And for the most part, we're probably going to see something similar to that. The only other running back that I think would challenge up there in number of carries, you could probably throw Nick Chubb into that mix there as well, right? Like, there's very, very few backs that are going to get over 300 carries on the ground there. And the beautiful thing about Josh Jacobs is he's got better hands than any of the other two guys in that same breath that you're going to talk about getting 300 carries with when you're talking Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, right? Like,
Chubb's hands are pretty good, man. They always had hunts, so they never had to throw him the ball.
Right. They don't utilize him that way, where for him to be, hit his good PPR seasons, meaning Chubb, like, he got 40 targets somewhere along the way there, right? Same thing with Derrick Henry. Tennessee went out and actively manufactured ways to try and get him checked down, little dump off passes to try and get him into space because they couldn't get the get the line moving and really get him, that 10 yards head of steam, and that offensive line opened up holes for him last year. So they were using a lot of checkdowns, and they were actively finding ways to try and incorporate Derrick Henry into that. And even then, right, like with them actively trying to do that, only got to about 40 targets on this one. So Josh Jacobs is one of the few guys out there that may see 400 plus opportunities this season when you combine both rushing and his pass catching work out of that. And is going to be a guy that can probably challenge for about 2,000 yards from the line of scrimmage again. So this is a guy that, yes, like Kevin, what you're talking about, where you get a high powered wide receiver, you pair him up with Josh Jacobs at the turn type of thing early, that late first, early second type of combo there. Absolutely love that kind of pairing. And Josh Jacobs is a guy that I'm willing to ride, just to take that leap with and take that ride on when it comes to, being that RB1 for me this year. And I really do think, right, like Alex, you bring this point up constantly. Look for guys in contract years. Contract year for him. He's still a young guy, still good tread on those tires. Let's hop on there and let it ride and see what it does. I'm Josh Jacobs, if he's on the board there, I got no problem hitting the smash draft button.
Would you pair him like with a Jonathan Taylor, right? Because Taylor's a guy who people got scorned by last year. We're seeing that in his draft capital this year. Anthony Richardson coming in at quarterback. There's hesitation that he's going to lose carries if you're not believing in the RPO and what that's going to look like. Would you be willing to do that if you're at the turn there at 12, right? Yeah. And you can double smash JT and Jonathan Taylor, Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs. Is that a pairing that you're comfortable with to kind of anchor your team moving forward?
I think so, especially if I miss out on the Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, right? Like if I miss out on those two, I think I would. I don't think I would mind going that route. And if I could pair those guys up, smash it, move on. And I'll go through and I'll pick up kind of that second, third tier type of wide receiver in the third round, and really try and make my hay that way and get the guys like see if Amon-Ra falls to that third round. That's that's going to be kind of pushing it there a little bit, but even then, looking at like Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Garrett Wilson, wouldn't mind starting those going that route if I've got those two workhorse type of running backs. So, any other thoughts on that one?
No, sir.
No, this is tough because lifelong Denver Broncos fan. It's hard to be objective about this team. Go on.
All righty. Zamir White, guy that we had high hopes for coming into this season because he was going to be behind Josh Jacobs. Do you see Zamir White getting more of a run this year, or is it going to solely be the Josh Jacobs train again?
I think slightly, and mainly because he's had a chance to digest an NFL system, right? Like you had Jacobs absolutely balling out. They did bring him in for a reason. At this point, he is not Josh Jacobs, right? Like he's not going to be able to go in and carry the ball 300 times. But, maybe you do see him sneak in there with 110 carries, something like that. And I think that might be part of the reason where Jacobs' numbers, like I said, drop a little bit from 340, maybe 325, 320, something in that nature. But a lot of it's protection, right? Like is he going to be able to help keep Jimmy G upright? Is he going to be able to do more than 3 yards in a cloud of dust? He was a big yak guy at Georgia, right? He'd hit that initial contact, plow through, fall forward, and you'd end up with 6-7 yards a clip. It's a little bit harder to do that in the NFL. Now his stature leads to that. He does play with a good pad level. And they got to see what they have, right? Because if they're not going to keep Jacobs and they're not going to see him as part of the solution long-term because they don't want to pay big money to a running back, well, then here's your heir apparent. So at some point you have to give him enough run to give a viable game assessment on if this guy can be your back going forward, or if you're going to jump back into the draft next season and bring in a running back that way.
So here's the only thing that concerns me about Zamir White, as looking at their depth chart as we record this, it's the two guys behind Zamir White that are on the depth chart, and that is two veteran role player running backs with Amir Abdullah and Brandon Bolden, like guys that have established themselves as veteran backs in this league that have been around. So, like, you know, how long is the leash, right? How long is the leash on Zamir White? Do they do that where they try to give him the run and try to see, is this guy the future? But if he fumbles, not literally, but if he fumbles the ball, right, how quick do those other, you know, serviceable veterans, you know, how quick do those guys come in and supplant him? Because those are known commodities, right? You know what you get with Amir Abdullah. The guy's been around. You know what you get with a Brandon Bolden. So, you know, what is the strategy there with Zamir White? That's a, you know, I don't know that even, you know, if you go handcuff on Josh Jacobs, right? Like if you get Zamir White as a handcuff, is that truly the handcuff to him? You know, like, so that's what concerns me about Zamir White. It's not so much about him, but who else they have on the roster. And we're not going to talk about those other two guys because I don't know that they have standalone value on their own. I think they are role players and you know, break glass in case of emergency guys. But, you know, if Zamir White becomes the emergency, then guess what? That glass is getting broken, and we're going to see a little bit more Amir Abdullah or Brandon Bolden if they happen to make the roster.
See, I wouldn't be concerned about either one of those guys. And reason being, right, they have a completely different skill set on what Zamir White does versus what Amir Abdullah does versus what Brandon Bolden does. Abdullah, more of a special teams kind of guy, you know, change of pace, pass catching type of guy. Same thing with Bolden, right? Like Bolden, even when he was in New England with Josh McDaniels, was more of a, you know, third down pass catching type of guy. If Jacobs goes down, I think that Zamir White is firmly planted in there on first and second down type of work. We'll see what pass pro looks like and his ability to pick that up and where he's transitioned to as pass pro at the NFL level. And that will be whether or not we see him fully take that kind of 3-down work there versus being 1-2. And then we see Brandon Bolden, Amir Abdullah, pick up third down if Jacobs goes down type of thing. So I wouldn't be concerned on those other two guys there at all. I think that Zamir White is a pretty interesting handcuff there, but even at that point, if you're sitting there last pick of the draft, you don't even necessarily need to spend that draft capital there. Zamir White will likely still be undrafted this season, even by all of the Josh Jacob managers when the season begins. So something worth keeping an eye on, and a guy that, you know, if you've got Jacobs on your roster and he goes down, yep, this is a spend the fab to put this guy on there because we've seen what the workload kind of looks like there. And I think we'll continue to see that workload shift over. All righty. Any other thoughts there?
No, well, yes. I think to Alex's point, I do think that there's probably not a guy that I'm looking for a handcuff for Jacobs. Like, I do think it goes to kind of a true running back by committee. What's your best skill set? And this is what we're going to implement, where Jacobs is able to do so many of those things on his own. If he were to go down and miss time, I think you're playing Russian roulette running backs at that point. Like, it's just, you know, maybe you take a flyer on one of them in a best ball league just to try and recapture some points if your top back goes down. But in a redraft league, especially if you have fab budget, I would sit back and wait. I would not worry about the draft, having a draft spot used on any of the other Raider running backs.
I like it. All righty, let's head over to the wide receiver room. Davante Adams finished wide receiver 2 last year, 100 receptions, 180 targets, 1,516 yards, 14 touchdowns, an average of 10.6 targets per game. Thoughts on Davante Adams?
Take everything from last year, crumple it up in a ball, throw it out the window, because it is a different quarterback running the show there in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be different with Jimmy G there. Now, when Jimmy G is healthy, I think he and Davante Adams can get on the same page, right? Davante Adams is not necessarily a speed receiver. He is a good route runner and has very sure hands, but he is not a speed demon. So I think you go back and you look at some of the things that made Deebo Samuel successful in his rookie season, even before he went to the running back game, right? And now you take that talent level and you up it, right? Because we all agree that Davante Adams is a better wide receiver than Deebo. And so you kind of get some of that in. But, man, I think wide receiver 8 or 9 sounds about right. Like, I do think he gets there. I think they find ways to get him open, and there's enough chemistry there that he still finds a way to get 7-8 touchdowns out of this season. But, man, being in the top 3 of wide receivers is going to be a tall task. Kupp stays healthy. Justin Jefferson able to continue to build upon what he did last year. I think Jamar Chase is going to have a really, really good year. You still have Tyreek down in Miami as long as Tua can stay healthy. There's just a lot of
Diggs
really
and Buffalo.
good. Yeah, and Diggs and Buffalo. There's a lot of really good top-end receivers. So you have to have a special season to finish top 3. And I don't know that you're going to see any of those, 250-yard, 3-touchdown performances this coming season out of Davante Adams.
So to add to Kevin's point, when you look at, those high-end receivers and guys that we kind of expect to be in the conversation of wide receiver 1, all of them, for the most part, with the exception of maybe a Garrett Wilson, if we think he's going to be there, have the same quarterback that they have had last year. Davante Adams does not have that luxury, so he is starting it over again. And even when he went to Las Vegas, he had some familiarity with Derek Carr, right? Like he had some familiarity because they played college together. So this is going to be an interesting one, and I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts, because I wrote it down to myself here. Thinking, what if you do that draft strategy if you go with the Davante Adams in the first round? And then the more I thought about it, it's like, are you even going to go with Davante Adams in the first round? Because the draft strategy would be Adams and then Jacobs, and that would put you in quite a bit of a bind there, right?
Yeah. I think Adams, you're going to see him going about mid-second round.
Right.
So you have the ability, again, you can do some special things with that, right? Like, if you're a 0 RB guy, right, pairing Travis Kelce and Davante Adams together could be something really special. So if you go that route, if you are more of a running back centric guy, then you're trying to pair him up with, Christian McCaffrey, Bijan, right? Because Bijan's climbing up draft boards the way it is. Some different combinations like that, which I don't necessarily hate. My biggest thing is, if I have Davante Adams as my number 1 receiver, I need to make sure that in that 3rd round, I'm grabbing another one to hedge my bets, right? Like if I'm playing the ceiling on Davante, that's fine, but I need to play a maybe not just as high, but a more probable ceiling in someone else. Meaning going the route of like a Jalen Waddle. Like I would want Jalen Waddle as my number 2 right behind that. Maybe Devonta Smith out of Philadelphia, or A.J. Brown, right? Depending on how that goes. I don't think Brown will be there, but draft boards fall in some weird ways, and sometimes stupid stuff happens. We've all seen weird things, but I would definitely want to pair him up with someone strong. T. Higgins would be another one. Pair him up with another strong wide receiver in that 3rd round to make sure that room is set. And if Adams does suffer, I can have someone else right behind him to kind of carry that weight and not feel like I'm at a positional loss.
Yeah, I mean, another name that you could pair up would be like a Chris Olave. That would be a good one in there too. And that could absolutely, like, what you're talking about, you could absolutely play that out that way. And then you could get pair that up with your second running back of like a Damian Pierce in the 4th round. Like that would be a pretty good set there. Or you could even go with like a Kenneth Walker in the 3rd, like he could potentially be there. And then you in the 4th, you hit up a Amari Cooper type of deal. Like that could be a pretty strong showing and pairing there as well. But Davante Adams is a guy that's very interesting. And no, Alex, I think that if you take Davante in the 1st round, you're going to be reaching on him pretty good because he's got kind of that mid second round capital there. So you let the board fall to you as it does there. I wouldn't have a problem going that route and putting Davante on as my wide receiver 1. And to Kevin's point there, I'm keeping a very close eye in the 3rd round and seeing what receivers are there and what I think would also be there in the 4th round. And as far as receiver running back in a single QB league. And if I need to pivot one way or another, but in that kind of draft strategy, you're walking out of the first 4 rounds with 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and you're making sure that you're kind of locked and loaded with some heavy hitters and some guys that have both upside and pretty set floors at that point. So, but yeah, as far as that goes, Davante Adams is a guy that, we always try and, have the arguments where it's, Allen Robinson was a quarterback proof type of wide receiver. Davante Adams is kind of, quickly showcasing that as well from the standpoint that we've seen him have 4 seasons where he's had over 100 receptions, over 1,300 yards in the past 5. Like the dude just goes out there and performs. And with as much capital as they have invested in him, even with that quarterback changeover, like this is an organization, a team that went out, got him, and brought him in here and spent a ton of capital to do that. So I see no reason why we don't see him have another 160 plus target type of season, even with Jimmy G there, and flat out just absolutely performing. I think 100 receptions and 1,300 yards is probably in the books again. Whether he gets a 14 touchdowns, that's a little bit of a question mark. But even if he regresses to like 9 or 10, I'm still good with that. So I'm okay putting Davante Adams on that and hitting the smash yes button.
I guess it really just boils down to, do you trust Jimmy Garoppolo to feed him as much as his previous quarterbacks have? You would think that would be, at least for Jimmy G, that would be the easiest thing. And honestly, like, they still have Josh Jacobs, right? So teams are going to have to honor the run. You still have other guys around Davante Adams that can still beat you if you don't pay attention to him, right? So like it bodes well for Adams. The pieces that are around him help him. So it just really just comes down to, do you trust that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get it? Derek is very firmly in the camp of yes. I'm not so certain that I'm firmly in that camp. However, if he is there in the 2nd round and I'm, looking at that as an option after, what I get in the 1st, then yeah, you have no reason to believe otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy G's a high completion, short throw kind of guy, right? Like Davante Adams is not a, burner down the field, contested catch for, 30, 40 yards down the field kind of guy. He's a guy that will work short to intermediate
and can get himself open.
And if you put the ball in his catch radius, he's coming down with it. Like, this is one of those that I think that these two pair up incredibly well together. And the fact that, they went out and got another wide receiver that understands what Josh McDaniels likes to run as an offense. And the guy we're going to talk about next, I think actually helps out, take some of the pressure off Davante Adams there as well, and off of Jimmy G and opening up some more passing lanes. So.
Well, then let's talk about the next one.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about Jakobi Meyers, wide receiver 28 last year, 67 receptions, 96 targets, 804 yards, 6 touchdowns, an average of 6.9 targets per game. Thoughts on Jakobi Meyers?
I don't know how I feel about this. I think he is going to take a step back from fantasy production a little bit, right? Where he was kind of a borderline wide receiver 2 at times, and then he'd have some down weeks. I feel like he's going to have more down weeks than up weeks here with the Raiders, just because as confident as Derek is with Jimmy G and Davante Adams, I'm a little bit more skittish, right? Like I'm just not settled yet on how I feel about that. And with Jakobi Meyers, I think he'll have a couple nice games. He's a best ball piece that I would add, but he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. So that does or didn't, right? This might change now that he's in Las Vegas and doing something a little bit, different with the Raiders than what he was doing with the Patriots. But he's not a bad receiver. He's just a much better possession receiver than he is stretch the field, score the touchdowns. He doesn't high point the ball exceptionally well, but he does have really good hands, and he always seems to come down with the pass. So I think there's a use for that, but I'm not necessarily seeing high-end production. So I would say I would say pass. Like he is not a guy that I'm going to actively target as a third or, maybe as a fourth receiver on my team, just depending on how the board falls. But I am not actively targeting him. I think I would go towards an offense who is a little bit more efficient and maybe even pass happy, or even spreads it around a bit more and doesn't get so wide receiver one focused. So I do think that takes away from him a little bit, but I do think he can be productive, but I think it's going to be very much peaks and valleys for Jakobi Meyers this season.
And I think the valleys will come from two guys that we're going to talk about later in a different position group that are going to probably ruin some of his chances at getting some of those touchdown points. And so that's really where, I'm a little skittish as well on Jakobi Meyers. I mean, look, he did okay on a team that didn't have, I would say, not as good a quarterback as Jimmy Garoppolo. But he also didn't have, a Davante Adams there as well, to kind of overshadow him, right? So you take the numbers that he had last year, and again, this new piece, new quarterback, like it's going to be different. I don't know that. I think what he had last year is probably high end for what we can expect for him this year. And because of that, like that wasn't all that great, right? Like it was fine. It was wide receiver 3, but that like you're really going to have to be saying a lot of prayers on Sunday to make sure that he helps you out.
Fair enough. Yeah. This was one of those two that I think Jakobi Meyers will actually outperform where he's coming off the board right now. He's coming off the board in kind of the 10th, right? Like this is one of those that he's going to be a depth piece for you. I really like Kevin's idea of a best ball kind of candidate because I think he will have a couple of big games there. But it wouldn't surprise me to see him have the term I call is the Juju syndrome, where he has a wide receiver that's opposite him that's going to demand the defense's attention and actually opens things up for him and allows him to, get good production off of that. Funny enough, right? I bring up the Juju syndrome. He's coming off the board like a pick after Juju Smith-Schuster, right? Juju's coming off the board, wide receiver 46. Jakobi Meyers coming off the board, wide receiver 47. I think Jakobi Meyers will perform in wide receiver 3 territory, probably back end wide receiver 3 territory. So it's one of those that he'll have a couple of good games. He'll have a couple of vanishing games. I think that for season long, it's going to be very frustrating for you trying to figure out which of those games was fantasy usable and which one of those was not. And so from that aspect, I'm probably going to be out on him. But from a best ball standpoint, I do like what he can do and what I think that his role is going to be in this offense. So best ball, I'm in. Season long, I'm probably out. But I do think that he will outperform where he comes off the board right now as well. Any other thoughts on Jakobi?
Nah.
All right. Hunter Renfrow, wide receiver. That was wrong. Well, anyway, he had 36.
28.
Not 28. 36 receptions, 50 targets, 330 yards, 2 touchdowns, an average of 5 targets per game. Thoughts on Hunter Renfrow?
Hold on. Before we get into this, are we talking about Hunter Renfrow on the Raiders, or are we talking like everybody else is that Hunter Renfrow will be playing for somebody else when we line it up in August?
Right now, he's on the Raiders.
He is on the Raiders right now, but I do think that there is a team a few miles to the east of Las Vegas that would like to have his services. And that's everything I can see about Hunter Renfrow right now, is that he's going to the Big Easy and chasing Derek Carr.
Maybe.
Which is why I picked him in that dynasty startup that we just had.
There you go.
Because I trust the Hunter Renfrow with Derek Carr as the quarterback. I'm not so certain that he does much if he stays on this roster, because there are so many other options for Jimmy Garoppolo to find, including two guys in the tight end room that we still have yet to talk about. So I'm not a huge fan of Hunter Renfrow if he stays on Las Vegas. I'm a little bit more inclined to take a late round flyer on him if he is on his way out of Las Vegas.
I think he's going to be more productive this season for now with the Raiders than what he was last year. And mainly because Carr didn't necessarily check the ball down. Like, his average depth of target wasn't astronomical, but he also, he force-fed Adams, right? Absolutely force-fed him. Garoppolo's a little bit more check down, right? Comes from that Shanahan system. And take what the defense gives you, and you don't always have to force this. Like, I think that is going to be really hard for the Raiders to break that habit, right? If they want to feature Davante Adams, they're going to have to scheme Davante Adams open for a number of catches, because Jimmy G's not going to force it in the way that Derek Carr did. And because of that, I think it leads to more middle of the field, quick passing trees. And so if you don't have Adams running a slant, most of his damage is outside the numbers. He can go in, but he doesn't nearly as much at this point in his career. Hunter Renfrow still does it because he knows he's got to go in the middle of the field to eat. Otherwise, he doesn't get a paycheck. So I do think that you'll see him be used probably just a touch more, or at least targeted more, because you're going to see that quick release from Jimmy G, and he's not going to force the ball down the field.
Yeah, and Hunter Renfrow is a guy that, it was always one of those that, for him to do well, he had to not have Darren Waller on the field. And right now, Darren Waller is no longer a Raider, got traded over to the Giants there. I think Hunter Renfrow will do all right? Like, the Raiders are going to run a fair bit of 11 personnel. So you're going to have 3 wide receivers. He's their slot guy. Like, he will do okay when it's all said and done. Is he going to have great fantasy production? No, but is he going to get up there in a wide receiver 4 territory by the time the season's done? He very well might. And this is one of those that you're going to get, some really no draft capital spent on him. He's going to be, again, I think very frustrating to the point where he'll have some games where he may catch a touchdown or 2 and have some decent performances there. But when it's all said and done, he's going to give you a lot of games that aren't usable for fantasy. And quite frankly, I wouldn't use the roster spot to try and figure out which game I wanted to try and use him. There are other options out there that I'd rather go with. And so for a lot of those purposes, I will not be seeing many Hunter Renfrow, the name Hunter Renfrow on many of my season-long rosters here. That's one.
I'm saying cosign. I'm not going to be targeting him anywhere.
Very good. All righty, let's go ahead and hit up the tight end room here. Austin Hooper coming over in the offseason. Tight end, 41 receptions, 60 targets, 444 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3.5 targets per game average last season. Thoughts on Austin Hooper?
Kevin's just glad that it's a Raiders tight end that isn't named Darren Waller.
Yes. Yes. I think you'll see some more targets, some more yards. I don't know that the touchdowns change a whole bunch. Like, I just don't see him being an active target. Hooper is a pretty good blocker, so they will use him in line to be able to kind of get on one side or the other to help with Josh Jacobs. And while they're developing Michael Mayer, the passing schemes are really what's hardest, right? We know the guy can run routes, route trees. So as he's learning the verbiage, I think that's where Meyers going to be more utilized, especially his rookie season. They're going to work on his blocking for sure, but they want to see what they have as far as a pass catcher and another weapon down the field. So that leaves Hooper more in line. So numbers slightly elevated, but I don't see a big tick, and Hooper is a guy that I am not drafting. If I need him that bad, I'll pick him off the waiver wire.
Yeah, I think, again, with tight end, like streaming option, right? Like that's what Hooper is. You hope you can catch him on a good week when you play that card. But yeah, as far as I like what Kevin has said and continues to say on this show is that, and Derek too, it takes a couple years to get a rookie tight end into their full, capability in the NFL. They are asked to do a lot. And a lot of them come from programs where they're not asked to do that much in the college game. They're not asked to block as much as they are in the college game because they can get out and be a great mismatch against an undersized linebacker or a nickel back that comes in, because so many teams in college now play almost exclusively nickel. So because you have to against the spread team. So yeah, I think, that they're going to try and get what they can out of Mayer in terms of the passing game, but Jimmy G can support tight ends being productive in this league. And he has, with San Francisco. So it does give me a little bit of encouragement of, again, I don't know that I'm drafting him, but he's an okay option if you are looking for a streaming tight end.
Yeah, I'm just going to be out on Austin Hooper here, right? Like, this is not one of those I'm going to spend a draft capital pick on. None of that. Like, nope, no, thank you. Simply from the standpoint that where he's coming off the board in the 300 range, undraftable territory. So yeah, if I need one, I'll stream it, and I'll probably go look another way there. But this is one of those that last season the Raiders didn't send a ton of targets to the tight ends. Like out of all of their targets, they had more targets go to the running backs than they did the tight ends there. And I don't know that there's going to be a ton of shift on that one. And Austin Hooper, quite frankly, Austin Hooper's made his hay off of one season with Matt Ryan, where Matt Ryan hyper targeted him in Atlanta. And outside of that, we've been hoping for a repeat, and I'm just not going to jump on that train again. I'm out on it.
And in fairness, Darren Waller only played 9 games last year, right? Something like that. So when you lose that caliber of a tight end, it's easy to try and go somewhere else. And when you have, the pass catcher that is Davante Adams, it's much easier to try and, wing it in there and hope for the best. You like your odds better than throwing it to backup tight end, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, but Foster Monroe's still a serviceable tight end in this league. Like,
he's a saint.
Well, yes, I'm talking last year when he's talking about Darren Waller being out and all of that. Like, Foster Monroe was still a serviceable tight end in the league, and they still chose to throw the ball more to running backs than they did their tight end room there. So I don't know that I'm going to get on the Josh McDaniels has found the secret sauce here to the tight ends, and we're going to see serviceable numbers on these things. I'm just not going to chase that one myself. Michael Mayer, rookie, drafted in the second round, pick 35 out of Notre Dame. Thoughts on Michael Mayer?
Potential's there. I think he's going to be used more as a receiver his rookie year. But nevertheless, he's got to be able to block, right? Like, you have to be able to keep him in line for formational differences. And it takes a little bit for these guys to develop. There's a lot of pass catchers in Vegas, a lot of balls to go around. So I'm not expecting monstrous things out of him. I'm not looking to target him, much like Hooper. He'll be on the waiver wire at some point, and then I can worry about if I want to try and take that gamble. But to start the season, I'm not drafting the guy. I'll wait and pick him up later on.
He's a nice piece for rookie drafts to pick and stash. In terms of a redraft league, and realistically, when we're talking about tight ends in a redraft league, odds are that you're going to have maybe anywhere, if you're in a 12-team league, probably 15 to 20 that are going to be on people's rosters at any given time. And so, I don't know that he's one of the top 15 or 20, which means he's probably not going to be on somebody's roster in a redraft league. So you just pay attention.
Yeah, redraft, I'm out on him. Rookie dynasty, I like him as a third round type of deal when he's fallen to me a couple of times there, but I do see him sneaking up into first and second round picks and not only like second round, but early second round picks in dynasty there. And that kind of capital, I'm still out on that one. Let's wait and see what happens there. And there's some other options to go. So any other thoughts on the tight end room?
No.
All righty. Heading over to the quarterback room. Jimmy Garoppolo coming in. He finished at QB 25 last year. He was 207 completions, 308 targets, 67.2% completion, 3,524 yards, 16 TDs, 4 interceptions, 23 rushes, 33 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Thoughts on Jimmy G?
Real quick, before we do get to Jimmy G, I guess I did have one more thought about the tight ends, and that is because of Jimmy G and his propensity to share the ball around. I do think, and I mentioned this when we were talking about some of the wide receivers, specifically Jakobi Meyers, that because of that, collectively, those tight ends, I think, will take away some of the touchdown totals that a Jakobi Meyers can get, right? That's kind of where I see those numbers coming from. Is from a Jakobi Meyers to the tight end room collectively. I don't think either of those guys have, stellar seasons on their own, but collectively that's where I see some of that going. Anyways, on to Jimmy G.
All right. Thoughts on Jimmy Garoppolo?
Serviceable QB2 in a super flex league. He's not a top. I don't see him in the top 15. So he's not a guy that I'm targeting, in a redraft single quarterback. Necessarily, but he might be a nice piece if you wait on quarterback. And really wait. Jimmy G may not be the worst guy to pair up with like a Tua, who might have some injury concerns, right, with the headache or with the head, or even a Geno Smith, who, if you're afraid there might be some sort of recession, and then you can play matchups a little bit there. But by himself, he's not a guy that I'm actively going after without some assurances on either side.
I totally co-sign to that train of thought, but I do have a question for the room because I think that Jimmy Garoppolo is serviceable and you can insert him into your lineup and what you see is what you get, right? But to Kevin's point of pairing him up with a quarterback who may have a propensity to not be available week in and week out, what if you pair him up with one of these rookie quarterbacks who may take their lumps early in the year?
I think he'll outperform the rookie quarterbacks this year.
All of them?
All of them?
Maybe Anthony Richardson's the only one that I would.
And that's the one that came to my mind too.
And that's the one that came to my mind too, was if you draft an Anthony Richardson, do you go and get yourself the insurance policy of Jimmy Garoppolo?
Jimmy Garoppolo's one I'm trying to think of the nice way to say that, but
also that, yes.
one play away from missing several games himself. Like this is a gentleman that's been health adverse for many seasons now. So
yeah, if I'm going Richardson, if I'm waiting and that's the guy I'm choosing to put my flag in the ground for, I'm probably going to pair him up with more like a Kenny Pickett. Like, he's a guy who's not going to run as much, but is an offense that will protect him. We saw growth out of Kenny Pickett last year. Like, maybe he can take that kind of year 2 leap, if you will, something like that. And it would be an odd pairing. And I know we're getting off topic from the Raiders here, but just you want to talk about quarterback pairings. That I think I'd lean more of that range, possibly even like a Jordan Love, right? Jordan Love's a guy who, he'll go later in drafts. I like Jordan Love this year, so maybe I do something like that and try and get a Jordan Love and Anthony Richardson. And you just kind of see which one sticks, right? Whether it's, you play the home games, so that way they, they're familiar with their area, or one who's going to be a little bit more gunslinger-esque in Jordan Love, and one who you assume is going to be a little bit more run heavy in Richardson. So you can kind of play that out a little bit, right? But it's hard to balance unless you're talking 10 years ago and the Matt Stafford, Ben Roethlisberger splits that we've all seen and kind of talked about with how crazy those were. And if you played them the right weeks throughout the season between Matt Stafford and Ben Roethlisberger, you had QB1 by like an astronomical amount because their home road splits were so like stupid crazy. That's hard to repeat, right? I mean, it is a little bit of Russian roulette, but it's an option that you have in front of you.
But and the reason I bring that up is because like I think we all kind of look at Jimmy Garoppolo as an insurance policy, right? Like he's not the first quarterback that he's not your first choice quarterback in a single QB league, but he is a nice, somewhat reliable when he's playing piece to have on your roster. And that's honestly how I view him, even with his weapons of Davante Adams, even with, a Josh Jacobs taking the load off and keeping defenses honest, I still, that's how I view a Jimmy Garoppolo, is that he's not a guy that I'm necessarily going out and being like, yeah, this is who I'm staking my fantasy football season on, right, from the quarterback position. But I don't mind having him on my roster to just get what I can get when I have to play him.
Right. And I think Jimmy Garoppolo is somewhere between QB 20 and 25 this year, right? Like that's where I see him kind of, when the season and the dust all settles, QB 20 to 25, where I would like Jimmy G as far as like a format and all of that goes would be like a Scott Fishbowl type of format where you're penalized for incomplete passes. You're penalized heavily for turnovers, sacks, those types of things. Jimmy G doesn't turn the ball over, doesn't throw a ton of, completes a bunch of passes out there and kind of dinks and dunks his way through that thing. So in that kind of format, I like him as my second, my second QB, my flex type of QB, but because he's not going to go out there and lose me a game like Kirk Cousins has notoriously done that in that format several times where he puts up big negative points to it. Jimmy G is not going to be a guy that's going to go out there and put up a monster performance and win me a week in that one, but he's also not going to turn around and hose me and lose me the week in that kind of format either. So in that kind of format, I like him. I like him as a second QB. Outside of redraft, he's a guy that, as a third QB in a bye week flex type of thing. Yeah, let's put him on there and let's go that route. And I'm down for that one. Any other thoughts here on the Raiders or Jimmy G? All right. Real quick before we get into the Falcons, wanted to hit up this question here. Tight end premium type of question. Where do you rank last year's tight end class to this year's tight end class, such as Mayer versus Dulcich, McBride versus Laporta, and where does Jelani Woods rank in your tight end class? We hit up the Colts last week with Jelani Woods on that one. Anyway, kind of run through that and just go point blank on this one. Mayer or Dulcich?
Dulcich, just because Sean Payton's offense is, I think, a little bit more tried and true, and I still trust Russell Wilson more than I trust
Jimmy G,
if nothing else, because of health. Right. Like Jimmy G's one hit away from sitting out the entire season.
Trey McBride, Sam Laporta.
I'm going Laporta only because McBride is still behind Zach Ertz. Like now, if they release Ertz and McBride is the clear-cut one, I think I do pivot back to McBride slightly because he has the experience from last year. But all things created equal, Laporta honestly has a clearer path to targets than Trey McBride does.
Mm-hmm. Any differing thoughts there, Alex?
No. Dulcich, I don't think got a fair shake because he was kind of hurt last year, right? Like you didn't get to see a full year of him. But again, I tend to lean more towards experienced tight ends versus inexperienced tight ends. So that's where I go.
Gotcha. Jelani Woods ranking the tight end class. I think he's intriguing, but with Anthony Richardson coming in, learning the offense, things like that, I'm not. I don't know that Colts.
I like his frame. Like I like the fact that he's 6'7" and can do some crazy things. But Richardson and pass catchers this year, I am not a fan of really any of the pass catchers. I mean, even Michael Pittman's, who I do like, is too rich right now. Like he's got to fall back down to earth because he's not going to finish as a wide receiver 2 with Anthony Richardson at quarterback his rookie season.
And then he's saying that Cecil Lammey says that Troutman could be the guy in Denver. I mean, it could be. They brought him in. He's very familiar with Peyton's offense, what he does there. So could be, but I think Dulcich is still going to be the pass catcher when out of the tight end room.
I love listening to Cecil, but I think he's full of crap on this one.
Fair enough. Any furthering thoughts on that?
Nada.
All right, we're gonna head right into the Falcons here. Falcons were 5-12 last year, 56% pass, 44% run. They were 32nd in total points for, 21st in yards for. Arthur Smith, the head coach, Dave Ragun, the offensive coordinator. And we're going to go right into the running back room where they drafted Bijan Robinson as the 8th overall pick out of Texas. Thoughts on Bijan?
Amazing prospect, coming into a team with a head coach and ownership with Tennessee ties, right? Or GM and coach with Tennessee ties. So, it's not going to surprise me to see him as a top 10 back. I'm interested to see how many passes he's really going to catch, though. So I don't know that I'm quite as high on him his rookie season as most, but if you want Bijan, you have to go out and get him. He's going to go in the first round. There is no hoping he slides. He's not going to do it. So if this is where you're going to plant your flag, that's fine. But that means at pick number 5, basically in the first round, this is the pick you have to make if you expect or want him on your roster. If you wait any longer than that, he's just not going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, you take the risk. I think the risk is worth it, but it's a risk.
See, and at that point, with my first overall pick, I pivot and I'll go somewhere else, right? If I'm looking at that, there's plenty of running backs that we're more familiar with what we can probably expect out of the system. I probably would pivot even and look at like a Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson potentially at that point as well. Like Bijan, incredible talent. I think that he's going to do incredibly well, but I think that this is going to be one of those that the expectations overrun what the fantasy production ends up being at this point. Because to Kevin's point, he's coming off the board at RB5, right? Like when you're doing that, you're going to have to go out and perform at that level. There's not a ton of rookies that we see end up getting to that level and performing better on that draft capital there. So I'm probably going to be out, especially when I can pick up some other options there and go on that route. So, I'll pivot and go another way there. But incredible talent and loving where I can get him in Dynasty, and the only other way that I might take him is more of like a keeper type of thing where I can get him and have him for years on end type of thing there.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. And honestly, the expectations through no fault of his own, right? Like we're all kind of building him up. I think that is what you need to go in with Bijan is high hopes, but tempered expectations, because he is still a rookie coming into this, and you don't really see rookies blast onto the scene, especially ones that are hoping to that have the expectation to do that.
Right. All righty, let's go ahead and hit up Tyler Allgeier, who finished running back 27 last year, 210 rush attempts, 1,035 yards, 3 touchdowns, 16 receptions, 17 targets, 139 yards, 1 TD. Thoughts on Tyler Allgeier?
Man, he could have just found the end zone a few more times.
Well, honestly, he served his purpose though. Like you picked up Allgeier so damn late that he served his purpose. My thing now is, especially in dynasty leagues, if I didn't have the number 1 pick, so I don't have Bijan on my roster, I'm shopping him to the Bijan guy just to get something back that I feel like I can use a bit more. Like, let him worry. It's not even worry, like, you're playing Bijan over the top, but you let him deal with the roster management and how he wants to handle that. Give me something in return. Give me, a piece of some other offense and just kind of move from there. Maybe you pivot and go wide receiver, and you can kind of see, what you're able to get as far as compensation. Realistically, it's probably in like that Cortland Sutton range. So you may not love what you're getting based off the youth, but something's better than nothing, because you're not playing him now until you at least get a couple weeks into the season to figure out how this game script's going to look like in Atlanta.
Yeah, and realistically, I think he might be a little too, just based on what he did last year, he might be a little too rich to even draft as the handcuff, right? Because you kind of don't want to spend all that much capital on the handcuff. But with where he's going, I see him RB 36 now. So that's pretty interesting for where he's going. You may not have to spend a draft pick on him, right? In some of these smaller single QB leagues, where you only have 1 or 2 running back starting spots and a flex spot. So I view him as a handcuff, but
so where
the dude's draft stock just fell incredibly after that pick was made.
Right, and this was a guy like in the home league. I've got him, and I would have him as a last round type of pick, second to last round type of pick, based off the deal. And I was actively thinking about potentially going that route from the standpoint of where he could do and the draft capital that's kept there. And even at that point, right, even with Bijan being on the roster, he's still coming off the board, running back 39, pick kind of 106. So kind of that 10th round, which that makes a lot of sense there. I think he's still going to have standalone value here. You've still got a very young quarterback in Desmond Ridder, who has 4 starts, coming into his second year. You've got a couple of young playmakers in Kyle Pitts, Drake London, who you both spent top 10 capital on as well. You don't have really much in the rest of the wide receiving core there. Couple that with the fact that that offensive line isn't great, and Tyler Allgeier managed to just break off some big runs and find his way to 1,000 yards there on not a ton of carries out there. I think that this is one of those we could still see him get 160, 180 carries when it's all said and done. And, we'll see him have a little bit of standalone flex type of value there, as, where he probably gets up into an RB3 type of territory. But that being said, I am still pivoting if I'm there and if I'm staring down that draft pick there, because a running back going a couple of picks later than him, I think is going to absolutely outperform him. And that's Samaje Perine coming off the board at RB41 right now. I think that is the way that I'd rather go if I'm looking to draft a running back in the 10th round type of thing there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the move that you make there. And that's the type of thing that you can rock and roll there. Any other thoughts on this running back room or Tyler Allgeier?
Nah.
All righty. We're going to hit up one quick question here before we get into the wide receivers. Captain Joe King, loving the stream. Who would you rather have, JJ or Chubb, CMC or Garrett? Am I wrong to think that Garrett's going to be a top 3 wide receiver with Rodgers? I want to see him do it before I'm going to, go out there and die on that hill. So I would rather have probably JJ and CMC.
I'm going to co-sign, but I'm going to co-sign for a slightly different reason. I think Chubb's going to have a career year this late in his tenure because there's no Kareem Hunt. There is no one else to vulture touches out of the backfield for them. Felton is not going to be the guy. We are going to see I think we're going to see competent quarterback play now that Deshaun Watson will have a full offseason, get through OTAs, be able to really work on his craft with his team all season long. You're going to see a more polished product than what we saw at the end of last year. But at the end of the day, the Browns want to run the ball, and Nick Chubb is the really best and only option they have, on top of the fact that Justin Jefferson I think Jefferson's going to finish as wide receiver 2 this year. And we'll get into that as we kind of get further in the breakdowns and everything else. But I think I like the overall point total, right? If we're just going off of how that looks, I think Justin Jefferson and Nick Chubb's point total surpasses CMC and Garrett. It's probably closer than what I'm believing off the top of my head. But nevertheless, I think JJ and Chubb will outscore the tandem of CMC and Garrett.
Any thoughts on that one, Alex?
No.
Okay.
I agree.
You can have a differing opinion. I mean,
no, and honestly, it's all because of what do I think CMC is going to be this year, right?
I think it's Garrett. How is Rodgers?
Well, no.
Rodgers doesn't
CMC,
do well
right,
with new weapons, right?
And that's
it
the thing.
takes
Yes.
some time to get everybody on the same page.
And
I could make a case that Allen Lazard's going to lead the Jets in receiving this year, and
Right.
people
And-
would blow their freaking stack. But that's who Rodgers is comfortable with.
Right. And would CMC be enough to carry the weight for how bad I'd say bad, but how ineffective Garrett will be versus those other two known commodities?
Garrett will be effective. He'll have better numbers than Watson had last year, right?
Yes.
Because he's already more of a finished product. He runs better routes.
Well, he's already been in the
his
league.
hands are better, that type of thing. So he's going to be better than Christian Watson, but he's not Davante Adams. Maybe not yet. He might become Davante Adams, right? I just don't think he's there yet. And at the end of the day, the Jets will run the ball more than the Packers did. Like, you will see Rodgers turn around and handing that football off more than he ever did in Green Bay.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, right? Like, you also bring up some really good points there, right? Like, even if Garrett Wilson has a tremendous breakthrough season, right? Like, even more than the offensive rookie of the year type of performance we saw last year, which got him to wide receiver 19. Justin Jefferson, do we really see him taking a step back shy of, an injury or something like that? Like, my answer is no. So you're going to see Justin Jefferson probably up there again, 18 points per game in a half-point PPR. Garrett Wilson, even if you're projecting him to get into a top 3 and finish it at number 3, which I don't see him doing, that's still a pretty good clip away from a point per game type of difference there. And I think CMC and Chubb will be closer than that gap there. So, I'm still on the JJ and Chubb train, breaking it down even on a points per game type of basis and going through it on that kind of analysis as well. All righty. Any other thoughts or no?
Negative.
All right. Drake London finished wide receiver 36 last year, 72 receptions, 117 targets, 866 yards, 4 tutties, averages 6.9 targets per game. Thoughts on Drake London?
I think you see London creep up in probably wide receiver 27, 26. Like, you might see him squeak into just barely wide receiver 2 category. I'm just not convinced that the Falcons are going to throw the ball all that much. And because Drake London, you have Kyle Pitts, but you can bracket both of them if you're really wanting to and just daring them to beat you with someone else. So I think that's part of the reason they like Bijan, is because he does help keep them honest. That safety is going to be in the box instead of bracketing Pitts. But with Drake London, nevertheless, you can double team him and kind of take him out of the picture at times if he starts to beat you. But some of that chemistry was there at the end of the year. I did like what I saw, right? So it's how does Ridder develop in the offseason, what he's able to do. I think touchdowns are going to be the limiting factor. I think London's probably only going to see the end zone, 4 times in that offense. So then it's 4, does he get to 1,100 yards? 1,100 yards and 4 touchdowns on 85 receptions. I mean, it's plausible, but I don't think it's likely. And you need all that to be in that wide receiver 2 category. Like 1,100 yards and only 4 touchdowns does not do that. Like, it's a tough ask. So I like London. I like him as a wide receiver 3, as a flex play. It's not that I'm out on him, but I do want Drake London in the right spot. And I feel like I have appropriate expectations for what this season for him is going to be as they develop Desmond Ridder and figure out what they have in Bijan. So I'm hesitant, but I do like him in best balls much more than I like him in redrafts, because now I don't have to worry about it. I'll capture the highs because he's going to have a week with 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, something like that. So I can capture that. And then his stinker weeks where he, 2 catches on 8 targets for 36 yards, and I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's how I view him. He is a great piece in best ball. As far as redraft week to week, I don't know that I want that headache. I think there are other serviceable wide receivers that I think are going to be more consistent that I would rather look at.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of guys coming off the board even later than him that I would rather go, right? Like, he's kind of coming off the board, wide receiver 23 right now. I think he's going to have an incredibly difficult time living up to that draft capital. And when you look at some of the guys coming off the board just a little bit later than him, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 24, I think we see him have a better season than Drake London this year. Calvin Ridley, a guy coming back there. Like, Calvin Ridley is a guy that I think has a lot of kind of sneaky upside here. Coming off the board, wide receiver 27. Mike Williams coming off the board, wide receiver 29. Mike Evans even is a guy coming off the board, wide receiver 32. I think I'd rather go with some of those other guys than have to draft Drake London where he's coming off the board at.
And all of those guys that you just mentioned, maybe with the exception of Mike Evans, I trust the quarterback more, right? Like, I trust the guy that's going to be feeding him the football more than I trust Desmond Ridder.
I guess here's an interesting one, just to kind of put that: Deontay Johnson, Desmond Ridder.
You had to go there.
Or I'm sorry, I said Desmond Ridder. I meant Drake London.
Yeah, Drake London. Yeah, no,
Deontay Johnson, Drake London. Which you got to pick one. Which one is it?
I think I would lean towards Deontay.
I'm going Drake because I think Kenny Pickett kind of puts Deontay to bed. At least with Drake, I know he's the number 1 target.
It's fair.
Fair enough. All righty. Any other thoughts on Drake London? All righty. Mack Hollins. Are we even talking about this guy, or are we just saying don't draft and move on?
Best ball flyer redraft. No.
Cosign. Scotty Miller.
No.
No.
Okay, hard pass for me as well. All right, that's going to take us to the tight end room here. Kyle Pitts finished tight end 30 on a disappointing sophomore season. 28 receptions, 59 targets, 356 yards, 2 touchdowns, an average of 5.9 targets per game. Thoughts on Kyle Pitts?
He was supposed to be so much better.
He just didn't have quarterback play.
Oh, my gosh.
And then on top of that, he wasn't like that. Yeah. That's just what did him in. He didn't have the quarterback play. And then he when he did get the ball thrown his way, he just was not it. Right. No. So it was a perfect storm of a bad season.
And I fell into that trap, right? In the home league. I had Kyle Pitts and I thought I got him for a steal. Like I remember telling Derek, like, man, I can't believe that I just got Kyle Pitts right here. Like, I thought for sure he's going to be gone. It was a little bit earlier than what I was wanting to take tight end coming into the draft. But with Pitts sitting right there thinking, okay, I now have the most productive piece of this Atlanta offense in my hands. I will be okay at tight end. And God almighty, was he a stinker. Like, it was terrible.
Yeah.
So all that to be said, I think he bounces back. Like, I do think he bounces back. I think he does.
How could he not?
Well, right, but I think he finishes back in the top 6. Like, I do think he goes back to that. You'll see Ridder again. Tight ends are young quarterbacks' best friends. Alex, you love to say that. So let's see how that works. Ridder's not going to move as much as Mariota did. Yes, they're going to run the ball, but they still have to have a number 2 option to Drake London. And that's Kyle Pitts. It's putting him out wide. It's putting him in the slot off the line of scrimmage. Yes, he can block, but when you need to get the ball down the field, Kyle Pitts and Drake London are your 2 best options. So at the end of the day, I expect Drake London to be first in targets and Kyle Pitts to be second. 70 catches. I can go with 70 catches for Kyle Pitts, and I'll be okay with that. Like, if he can fall into the end zone 5 times, I think you're already sitting top 5 tight end. Like, just at that. So 70 catches, 880 yards, and I think that's probably a little less than what he might end up with, but I think that's a good ballpark range. And 6 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns. That's top 5. Like, because there are going to be other tight ends not named Travis Kelce who crap the bed and who don't make it happen this year.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that last year was an anomaly for Kyle Pitts, and honestly, I hope it is, because he did have so much promise coming into the league. I hope that Atlanta goes back and looks at some of his college film and see what was successful for him in college, and maybe try to utilize that a little bit more. Granted, he's not going up against cupcake state linebackers on an inconsistent basis, but he was in the SEC. He was doing fine.
And part of it was Mariota too. Mariota just abandoned him. Like, they just didn't use him. They were so convinced that they were going to run the ball 45 times a game and that they were going to live and die on that hill with Marcus Mariota that they bastardized Kyle Pitts. And I don't see that happening again this year. I do think they find a little bit more balance, and he will be a much more useful part of this offense than what he was last year.
Yeah, great. I think that you'll see him get somewhere around that 120 target range. I like the stat line that you threw out there for him, Kevin. I think there's a good chance that if we see him get those kind of receptions, we may actually see him get closer to 1,000 yards receiving on that one. Like, I can just. He has the ability to break one open and get downfield and do that. So I think that we could see him do that. If we see him fall into the end zone 5-6 times, we'll see him double up his career total in touchdowns. Like, that's in his rookie season when he went out and had one of the best tight end rookie seasons we've ever seen. That was the knock on him, was that he just couldn't fall into the end zone with 1 touchdown on that rookie campaign, 2 touchdowns this last season to it. But I think you're right. I think we will see them utilize him more so. And tight end 6 is where he's coming off the board right now, which, again, right, like, I think where you're able to draft him is kind of at his floor right there. So a good draft pick there, coming off the board in kind of that 7th round. Some tight ends that would be coming off the board kind of right after him would be Darren Waller, Evan Ingram, David Njoku, kind of all coming off the board, Pat Freiermuth all coming off the board, but they're coming off the board a couple of rounds later. Even at that point, I wouldn't necessarily mind taking the shot on Kyle Pitts with a 7th round type of pick and seeing where that one falls to me, type of thing. And I think we'll see him probably move up a little bit, even closer, maybe to the 6th round when it's all said and done here, when we really get into redraft here. But I still think that that's probably some pretty good, solid capital, and you're probably drafting him at his floor.
And not that it's not worth noting, but he did have knee surgery, right? Like, he missed a lot of time, did have knee surgery, was dealing with a hamstring. And as Kevin likes to point out, those soft tissue injuries, now an MCL is a little bit different, but he is coming off of knee surgery. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm not that concerned on it when it was, 6 months.
It was November. Yeah, it was November.
Right. It was,
so like it's
it was 6 months ago right now when when he went in for knee surgery, things like that. Like by the time we actually get into training
And
camp,
he's
things like that. Like
22, 23, they tend to bounce back a little bit easier.
yeah.
So what round are you wanting to draft Pitts in? If he's your guy at tight end 6 off the board,
I would go up to the 6. I think that's kind of where I capped that one at, right? Like, but I'm also very subscribed to the short that you put out, not that long ago, where it's Travis Kelce or late round. Like
Yeah.
Kyle Pitts is a guy that I might take a shot on in the 6th, 7th round if he's there for me, and I don't like what the rest of the board looks like for me. I'll take my shot on him there just so I can, kind of ride that train. But if I like a wide receiver or I like a running back in the 6th, 7th round is kind of that dead zone for RB. But if I like the wide receiver that's sitting there for my depth piece, I'll go with wide receiver over him, and I'll kick that ball down the road, and I'll end up taking tight end in the 11th, 12th round type of thing. But so 6 is the earliest I would go.
fair enough.
Alrighty, let's hit up old Desmond Ridder, who was quarterback 48 last year, 73 completions, 115 attempts, 63.5 completion percentage, 708 yards, 2 touchdowns, 16 rush attempts, 64 yards, 0 TDs. Thoughts on Desmond Ridder?
I can't. I can't. Right? Like even in super flex leagues, I can't. He's got to prove it to me first.
So Ritter's that third quarterback you want in a super flex, right? You're not drafting him in a single quarterback, but he is the guy that you want to draft as your third quarterback. Like, hey, maybe we have something here, or hey, just make sure his bye weeks don't screw up my other 2 quarterbacks, and I can kind of plug and play him, and then after he goes or the bye weeks go, I can dump him. That's kind of his role. Like, we all want to see this, but I'm expecting like half of Ryan Tannehill this season. Like, and I say that because he doesn't use his legs, right? Like Tannehill was useful in a border 10, 11, 12, ranked fantasy quarterback because of his legs. But just passing the ball, he wasn't overly efficient. So if you take half of that, like quarterback 26, like the 27, something like that. Like, I think he's better. I don't know that he's better, but like it's him and Sam Howell and the 3 rookies. Like those are the bottom 5 quarterbacks.
Here's the question I was going to pose to you. Does he finish inside quarterback 30? Like, is that a realistic expectation?
Yeah, because I think he'll stay healthy. There's no reason to think that he's going to be health adverse. And if nothing else, they don't really have anything behind him. So they're going to see what they have this year. Worst case scenario, they end up with another top 3 pick, and they were top 5 pick, and they do something. They spent a lot of money on the defense this offseason to try and make it easy on Desmond Ridder. We know they want to run the ball, so they're going to turn around and hand it off to Tyler Allgeier at Bijan a ton. It's all about efficiencies and accuracy, right? Like if he's only throwing the ball 25 times a game, can he complete 18 out of 25 for 215 yards and a touchdown or 2? Like, that's what you want out of Desmond Ridder. Mm-hmm. If he can do that, then he is going to be successful and absolutely finishes, 26, 25, something like that. Maybe even higher, just depending on some of the QB shuffling and what happens throughout the year. But if he's inefficient, right, and if he's going, 12 of 28 and only has 160 yards passing and, 2 picks, maybe a touchdown, maybe not, then yeah, you're going to see him kind of bomb out there at QB 30 just because the fact that he's not going to run the ball. There's no bonus points with Desmond Ridder. It's all coming off of his right arm.
Right. And I think that we've hit that one pretty well, right? Like your third QB in a super flex, that's what you're drafting him to be. That's where you're wanting to be. And looking at it, right? Like, who would you rather have? Would you rather have Desmond Ridder, or would you rather have Sam Howell? I think I'd probably lean to the Desmond Ridder tree right there. Desmond Ridder, CJ Stroud. Desmond Ridder, Mac Jones.
I see, and I think I'd take Sam Howell.
Fair enough.
And I don't know why. And maybe it's because my lasting impression of Sam Howell was tearing up the Cowboys defense. Like, he just looked good that game. Like, he gave enough optimism to it. And I know that Washington is not dead set on just running the ball into the dirt like Atlanta will. Like, Atlanta will really just run the ball into the dirt. I don't think Washington's willing to do that, nor can they in that division. You have to be able to keep pace with Philadelphia and the Cowboys offense. I know that the Commanders thumped them there at the end of the regular season, but earlier on in that season, the Cowboys laid the wood to the Commanders. I've about said their old team name 3 times now. But so you got to be able to keep pace, if nothing else, in this division. So you're going to be throwing the ball a little bit more. You can't hide in the AFC South where all these teams are kind of menial, and we expect the Saints to win that division by like 2 games, but barely, and only because they have the most veteran quarterback in that division. Like, so Hal maybe, but the other ones, I think I'd lean Ridder over Stroud just because I like the weapons for Atlanta more than I like the weapons for Houston right now.
Fair enough. And it's one of those two that when you look at it from the standpoint, this team would finish dead last in total points for. There's that old adage, they've got nowhere to go but up at this point, right? Like, I think that Ridder will allow them to actually throw the ball down the field and actually allow them to complete, more passing than what we saw Marcus Mariota do last year. Marcus Mariota was sufficient enough for your fantasy roster, especially in a super flex, to have him as your super flex QB and keep you in games with his, fringe QB1 performances because he was running the ball. Like, this is a team that was really, really bad. And again, I think they've got nowhere to go but up. And quite frankly, if Desmond Ridder bombs out, Kevin, you make a great point. They'll probably be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes at that point. So I think they've got nowhere to go but up on this one. But I do think that Desmond Ridder's a guy that could be interesting when it's all said and done. Any other thoughts on Ridder or the Falcons?
That's going to be a tough year for people who have a lot of stock in Falcons football.
Fair enough.
The people of Atlanta are ready for it. I talked to some folks back there, and they have zero expectations of this coming season. They're like, please, just don't get beat by 50. Like, just don't get beat by 50.
Be respectable.
Jamie asks, would you trade me the 105 for Ridder? No, I'm not going to trade you the 105. No. I don't get rid of first round picks for anything less than crazy good. So, all right, let's go ahead and hit up the Saints. 7-10 last year, 52% pass, 48% run, 22nd in points for, 19th in yards for. Head coach Dennis Allen, Pete Carmichael Jr., the offensive coordinator. We're going to head right into the running back room. Alvin Kamara, running back 18 last year, 223 rush attempts, 897 yards, 2 touchdowns, 57 receptions, 77 targets, 490 yards, 2 tutties. Thoughts on Alvin Kamara?
The 2 tutties were terrible, right? Like, we're used to Kamara scoring some touchdowns. Kamara's an interesting one, right? Like, this legal thing that has just been lingering on. Like, I know that we are doing this at the end of May. We are pre-Memorial Day recording this, talking about Alvin Kamara. So I don't feel like it's fair to give anybody judgment on Kamara until we get to August at this point. Like, I need more time for this legal situation to play out, because if he's suspended for 4, 6, 8 games, right, whatever this is, then we need to be able to pause and draft him accordingly. Now, on the flip side, if this gets swept under the rug for some reason and Goodell just decides that, hey, I'm feeling pretty good today and you're not going to get a suspension because it's arbitrary like that, there's no set, suspension bracket, well, then I think you're talking about a guy that you could probably pick up, in the 4th round and be pretty happy with that as your RB2, maybe even 3 this year. Like, there's such a vast range for Alvin Kamara right now. Much like the Falcons offense, there's nowhere to go but up. his reception totals, his yards per carry, his touchdown totals, everything was terrible, career lows. There's nowhere to go but up. He is a better running back than how he performed last year. Now, it's on Dennis Allen and company, right, to find a way to feature him and get him involved. I think that because of bringing the emergence of Chris Olave, the fact that Michael Thomas is seemingly healthy and excited to play football for the first time in 5 years, I do think that helps a little bit. It's just a matter of, can the offensive line stay healthy, and is Derek Carr going to be efficient enough to keep the safeties out of the box and let Kamara do his thing? However, Derek Carr is not Drew Brees. He is not going to check the ball down to Alvin Kamara 85 times in a season. Like, he's just not going to do that. That's not his game plan. So you need to be very mindful and very careful about that, because if you're drafting him to be your RB2 and finish, 12, 13, 14 with the upside of finishing RB 7, 8, 9, I think you might be a little disappointed.
Yeah, so July 31st is the new trial date, right? And keep in mind this whole legal thing, it happened in Las Vegas during the Pro Bowl, right? Like, the NFL protected
2 years
Shield.
ago, not last year's Pro Bowl.
Right.
Pro Bowl the year before.
Right. So, the NFL's protect the shield thing, like, I don't know. We'll see what comes of it. It is very interesting that, like, you cannot expect him to have as bad of a season as he had last year, but you also cannot expect him to have as good of any of the seasons that he had with Drew Brees at quarterback. Because, like you said, Kevin, Derek Carr is that's just not in his DNA to check the ball down and find that running back out of the backfield, 85 times. So I think somewhere in the middle, which that gap is quite wide, right, because of how bad last year was and how good the rest of those years were, somewhere in the middle is where Alvin Kamara ends up. And I'd like to say it's probably closer to the good years than it is to last year's bad. But I honestly am waiting, and I hope, folks that are listening right now have the luxury of waiting until after, this legal thing plays out and we do find out what the league is going to do in terms of his punishment or lack thereof, before they have to make a decision on it.
Yeah, this is one of those that Alvin Kamara really was the guy that was the efficient type of back, was the burst play kind of guy, catch the ball out of the backfield, make the things, make things happen from there. And with Drew Brees no longer in that picture, we haven't seen the Saints utilize him that way, to the point where, they're running the ball. Yeah, a heavy workload for him running the ball. During the Brees years was like 187 rush attempts, right? Like, he's gone up, 220, 230 the last couple of years. And we've seen him go from a 5+ yards per carry down to like a 3.74, 4 yards per carry type of thing. Also seen the touchdowns dramatically plummet on this thing as well. We've also seen his PPR work plummet there as well, to the point where he was easily an 80+ reception kind of guy, has yet to hit 50 the last couple of years. This could be some of the fact that I got burnt by the Alvin Kamara last year in the home league there, but I'm out on this one. I don't want any part of this one. That being said, there could potentially be some value off the draft capital. He's come off the board at running back 29 in kind of the late 7th, 8th round type of thing. Even at that kind of capital, though, I think I'm still out. I think there's a good chance that, we may not see him available for all of these games here. And there's a lot of things to still play out. But even if that, and even if he's, available for the entire season, I think I'm still out on him on where his draft capital is. Some of that could be just the fact of, jilted fantasy manager from last year, but I'm just out on this one. Let's go ahead and hit up Jamal Williams, coming over from the Lions. Was running back 8 last year. 262 rush attempts, 1,066 yards, 17 touchdowns, 12 receptions, 16 targets, 73 yards, 0 tutties. Thoughts on Jamal Williams?
This might be the reason why I hold hope for Alvin Kamara when he's on the field, right? Because Jamal Williams is going to be your between the tackle guy. He is built for that. That's where he's successful. He has a nose for the end zone, much like Alvin Kamara. So I do think you might see some touchdown vulturing away. But again, Kamara only had 2 rushing touchdowns last year. So what are you really giving up? So I think they're hedging their bets a little bit. A, they get more of a thumper between the tackles. B, they get a guy who can fill in as a lead back if Kamara does go down with the suspension. So I like Jamal Williams. I like him at the right price, right? Like I want him as, truthfully, I want him as like my 5th running back. Realistically, I know I'm going to have to take him at like my 4th running back in a draft to be able to kind of get him on my roster and capitalize on that. But I also understand there's regression, right? Like he's not going to finish in the top 10. But I do think he could finish in the top 24, depending on if he's able to fall into the end zone 6 or 7 times. So there's a pathway to being extremely useful, but I am not going to reach for Jamal Williams. He is going to have to fall to me where I am comfortable taking him.
Yeah, and again, I think so much of Jamal Williams does depend. I say so much. There is obviously a portion of Jamal Williams' value that is tied into how long Kamara is going to be out, if Kamara is going to be out. And so that is the thing. But I agree with Kevin. I think there is that standalone value. I think there's a reason why you brought him in was to protect against that. And so, at the right price, yes, Jamal Williams is a fine piece. I'm looking at it, and Derek, correct me here if I'm wrong, but like Kamara and Williams are kind of going back to back, which should tell you like where a lot of other people are too. It's like, oh, okay, like you see Kamara go, and then it's like the next guy's like, oh, well, then I'm gonna want the piece to just really drive the screw into the guy in front of me. So I think that's the interesting case here. There's so many outside factors for the value of Jamal Williams that he is intriguing, but at the right price.
Yeah, I mean, the problem that you've got is that Jamal Williams got to running back 8 last year because he had 17 touchdowns, right? Like went out and broke Barry Sanders' rushing touchdown mark in a single season, Detroit Lions franchise record type of thing, right? Like that was a historic season for that franchise and for him, right? Career year type of thing. One, I don't think we'll see that repeated. 2, I think that you do have that kind of murky situation that both of you guys have alluded to. But the other problem that you've got in New Orleans is another guy that vultures every touchdown that there's possible in a running type of situation named Taysom Hill. And we'll get to that type of deal later on here. But yeah, like this is one of those that Jamal Williams, I think we maybe see him get up to about 150 rush attempts, call it between 600 and 700 yards and probably 6 or 7 touchdowns, right? Like, I think that's where we see him ultimately kind of line up there. He's coming off the board running back 33, very late 7, early 8th round type of deal, right in that same kind of range as Alvin Kamara is going there. But there's running backs that I'd rather, take a shot on around that. And even then, kind of in that running back dead zone, I'd rather pivot and go wide receiver and build some depth for my wide receiver 3-4 type of thing than necessarily try and spend up on one of these running backs in here. And so on that case, I'm probably out on Jamal Williams, even if Alvin Kamara misses some time here. I think that if Kamara misses time, Williams will get off to a strong start, and we'll see him kind of fade down the stretch here for fantasy value.
And that's really a shame because I had Jamal Williams, a couple shares of him last year, and he was extremely helpful. But, new change of scenery, different situation. It's a whole new ballgame.
Right. And if you watched, Hard Knocks last year with Detroit, like that coaching staff was all in on Jamal Williams, like all in on that. Like it.
Yep.
So anyway, maybe they'll do Hard Knocks down in New Orleans, and we'll see if this coaching staff's all in on Jamal Williams too, and we'll know whether or not to draft him. That's the secret. Anyway, moving on. Kendre Miller, the rookie, drafted in round 3, pick 71 out of TCU. Thoughts on Kendre Miller?
I know a lot of people are kind of talking up the fact that he could be the Alvin Kamara role if he's suspended. Kendre Miller's a nice piece. Played at TCU, right, and had a very good season there for the Horned Frogs. But it's Jamal Williams. Like, it is Williams who will be absorbing all that. Kendre Miller will become a change of pace guy. He might see, 8 or 9 touches per game if Kamara goes into suspension. I don't see the hype on why people are drafting him so high in rookie drafts. Like, I am laughing, saying thank you, like push the guys I want down the board a little bit farther in the second round, because I'm not buying this hype. It is Jamal Williams who's going to be the beneficiary of Alvin Kamara if he misses time. And if he doesn't miss his time, and if he does not miss time, Kendre Miller's relegated to the 3rd running back on a team that I'm not convinced is going to run the ball all that much. Like, I think they brought Derek Carr in there for a reason. They want to kind of air it out a little bit. Yes, they want to have a running attack, but I think that comes more in the red zone more so than in between the 20s. I think Derek Carr is going to be chucking it all around the yard this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's best case scenario, he's the backup, right, with Kendre Miller. Best case scenario, he's the 2nd string running back. And the likely scenario is that he is the 3rd string running back for a majority of the season. Like, there's a reason why the Saints went out and got Jamal Williams. Like, there's a reason why they went and did that. So I think that was to cover their own backsides. And then, look, Kendre Miller was hanging out there in the draft, and that's a good piece to go grab. But in redraft leagues, I just don't see it. I don't see the value of spending a draft pick on that.
Yeah, I don't either. This is one of those that Dennis Allen, the head coach of the Saints, was the head coach of the Raiders when the Raiders went out and drafted Derek Carr. Like, this is one of those that, and they went out and threw the ball when Derek Carr got there, right? Like, they very much went out there and threw the ball. Kendre Miller is a guy that, yes, he'll have some flashes here, I think, on this one, especially if Kamara misses some time. He'll get some opportunities here and there, and he'll try and make the most of it. But again, I don't know that he's going to supplant Jamal Williams in this one. I really don't see that one happening. And on top of that, right, like, there's other rookie running backs that I'd rather have, than Kendre Miller, right? Like, going later in redraft type deal. Like, I'd rather take my shot on Roschon Johnson than Kendre Miller, even in a redraft type of format, right? Like, and again, you're talking 3rd string running backs going into the season here. I think Roschon will outperform Kendre Miller when it's all said and done.
Fact. Best ball, right? I would do Kendre in best ball.
Yeah.
For that long shot reason. But I do agree with the Roschon take. I think he cements himself as RB1 the back half of the season. Kendre Miller's still RB2 unless there's injuries and just a absolute, kind of implosion going down in New Orleans.
Yeah. And, again, the Saints running backs have a Taysom Hill problem. Like, flat out. They
didn't use him nearly as much last year, though. Like, that was that was Sean Payton's gadget. Dennis Allen has not fully subscribed into it. I think they just can't cut him because they owe him too much damn money.
So we'll get to Taysom Hill, but he finished tight end 5 and had 13 targets. Like, he was putting up fantasy points because he got into the end zone 7 times on the ground. So
that's an issue.
they've got a Taysom Hill problem, right? Like, we talk about running quarterbacks vulturing touchdowns from running backs. They've got a tight end playing wildcat to do that. So, anyway, we'll get to Taysom Hill and flush that one out here fully. But let's go ahead and head up to the wide receiver room here. Chris Olave, wide receiver 25 last year, 72 receptions, 119 targets, 1,042 yards, 4 touchdowns, an average of 7.9 targets per game last season. Thoughts on Chris Olave?
I like him. I mean, last year in the rookie class on this podcast, right?
Yes,
I told you guys that Olave was my pick to be the best receiver out of this group. Now, Garrett Wilson's doing wonderful things up there in New York. I commend him for what he's doing. I still think Olave is the best receiver out of the group. And they're old teammates. I mean, so it's kind of a fun little banter back and forth with them. Like, holy crap, you guys had this much talent at wide receiver, and there's zero to show for it down there in the horseshoe. So there's my dig at the Ohio State. Anyway, I like Chris Olave a lot. I think he's going to get peppered with targets. I could see him jump up into the top 12 for wide receivers this year in fantasy production. I think his ceiling is probably like wide receiver 7. I don't see him going necessarily any higher than that. But as long as Michael Thomas remains healthy and interested in football, I think that helps Chris Olave, because Thomas in name alone will garner attention. And they will be forced to do that. Last year, Olave he was that by himself. There was no other option down there. You had Taysom Hill running him in for touchdowns. Kamara's not getting the ball thrown to him. You have, Jim, Jack, and Harry playing wide receiver for the Saints outside of Chris Olave, and they still couldn't stop the guy. Like Jameis Winston, winking with his third eye as he's trying to accurately throw the ball down the field. And he still finished wide receiver 25. I think he's going to have a great season, and he is a awesome pickup in the third round of redrafts.
I don't want to sing the praises of Chris Olave because there's somebody on this podcast who traded him away in the home league.
And somebody else who acquired him in that same league.
Also that, and a series of unfortunate events. Which is really just how I should label all of last year's fantasy football league in the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football League. Just a series of unfortunate events. So yeah, like I was high on him last year. That's why I drafted him last year. And it turned into a desperation play where I needed to make a move to get another quarterback because I was an idiot. And just felt like that was my back was up against the wall, and in order to have some semblance of a decent season, I had to trade away Chris Olave, and then watch him go do quite well down there in New Orleans. So yeah, I would like to think that what Kevin said is correct, that because of the added pieces, because Derek Carr does like to force feed. Now, if he catches that, Davante Adams like bug and just force feed a dude the football, like Chris Olave can be that guy. So like you would have to think that that's going to benefit him in terms of his targets, and more targets generally leads to more receptions and more opportunities to get points. So I like Chris Olave. I'm kicking myself for having traded him away, because he would be in our home league. He would be a keeper candidate because I got him at a relatively reasonable price last year because he was a rookie. So that one stings a little bit. And so I'm going to stop talking now because it's making me quite sad.
Well, Chris Olave, I don't know what you mean, potential keeper candidate. He should have been a keeper candidate. He likely will be a keeper when it's all said and done on that one. So 10th round type of deal in that league. Yeah, there's a slim chance that he's going to be available for draft.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Anyway, let's make some more trades here in a minute. Anyway, We'll hit up that one later. But Chris Olave coming off the board, wide receiver 14, kind of that 30th overall pick. So right there in the middle of the third round, this is a guy that I think will absolutely outperform what he did in his rookie year. Will not surprise me to see him, I could very well see him get over 150 targets, go well north of 1,400 yards, and we probably see him get in the end zone 7-8 times. Like, I think that this is a guy, Kevin, you said you kind of gave him a ceiling wide receiver, 7. I think that's probably a pretty good ceiling there. And I really could see him finishing somewhere in that kind of wide receiver 7 to 10 range. I think that's really where I'm going to kind of see him playing out there. So I think that Chris Olave has a very, very bright season ahead of him. And I think that we're going to be looking back on this one and go, man, this guy was a steal in the third round. So smash the draft button and move on. Michael Thomas, wide receiver, 114 last year, injury shortened season, 16 receptions, 22 targets, 171 yards, 3 touchdowns, 7.3 targets per game. Thoughts on Michael Thomas?
I'll take a flyer on him as like my 4th wide receiver. Like, if nothing else, to try and regarner some of that magic. It's been a while since we played, so I might change my tune a little bit as we get into August, and we can kind of see how training camp's going and everything else. But I am keeping an eye on him because even if he's a fraction of his former self, he takes enough. He has enough presence, and his hands are good enough, to be able to do something. He was never a blazer, right? He was never dynamic down the field. He was a route runner with sure hands. They got peppered with targets. I think he can still be that. So maybe not quite to the extent, but like I said, I'll take a flyer on him, be my 4th wide receiver in hopes that he can get up into like possibly the back end of wide receiver 2 territory. Like, there's some value that you could get out of this pick. And again, I'll be monitoring the situation as we get closer to draft season. But here in May, I like the fact that he says he's all in. It's the first time he's seemingly been happy with the Saints organization since Drew Brees retired. So we'll see if he, picks his sucker up out of the dirt, brushes it off, and decides to go to work.
It's really funny to see his ranking right now and just the names that are kind of around him. Because 3-4 years ago, you'd think that you were talking about guys that were up in the upper echelon, and now they're down in like wide receiver 50. We're talking guys like there's Michael Thomas, there's Nico Collins, Odell Beckham Jr., DJ Chark. Like, these are guys that 3 years ago, and again, Michael Thomas has been a bit further, but that is just wild. Like, how quickly this league just chews you up and spits you out. And we'll see if Michael Thomas is engaged and ready to play, and if Derek Carr can utilize him. Maybe he is the guy that Derek Carr takes a Davante Adams type approach to and just force feeds him the football and tries to get him more touches than he probably should. Right? Like, that's the one wild card here is the guy that is distributing the football in a new system. I shouldn't say a new system because he knows Dennis Allen, but like in a new situation with new weapons around him. How is that going to work? I don't think it's going to go bad, right? We saw that with Davante last year, even though those guys were old college teammates. You'd have to think that professionals are professionals and understand the game and the concepts. So I like a Michael Thomas, and honestly, with where he's going, I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
Yeah, I mean, 120th off the board, wide receiver 51 right now. Like, there's tremendous value to be had there, because even if he, only gets up into, this is one of those that I think we'll find out very quickly whether or not he, where he's going to perform at. One of those, is he going to get up there into back end wide receiver 2, or is he going to, kind of flame out like we've seen the last couple of years? And if he, you spent 10th round capital on him, if he's going to be the version we've seen the last couple of years, okay, cool. You cut him, you move on, and waiver wire that waiver wire him out and get somebody else on your roster. So I think that there is some good draft value to be had here, and I think there's some good things that we can rock and roll on that one there. All righty. Let's go ahead and hit up. There it is. Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver 67, 28 receptions, 34 targets, 488 yards, 2 touchdowns, average of 2.8 targets per game. Thoughts on Rashid Shaheed?
Deep best ball flyer and nothing else.
Yeah, definitely not worth your time in a redraft.
Like if Michael Thomas goes down, maybe, right? Like if Thomas gets hurt again, then maybe I look at this as kind of, just to see what might happen as he moves up. But I don't think the Saints ideally want to feature 3 wide receivers. As much as I just said, I think they're going to toss it around the yard. I think they want Olave and Michael Thomas to be something along the lines of A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, or Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. Like, it's a 2 wide receiver set with some other ancillary pieces. It's not this is not the Kansas City Chiefs where we're just going to sprinkle around to everybody and, kind of here we go. So late, deep, last round best ball type thing, just to possibly have a flyer if you're, especially if you're a Saints fan. If not, I'm going to look some other options and just keep an eye on the waiver wire.
Yeah. Cosign. All right, let's go ahead and head over to the tight ends. Juwan Johnson finished tight end 11 last year, 42 receptions, 65 targets, 508 yards, 7 touchdowns, average of 4.1 targets per game. Thoughts on Juwan Johnson?
I like Juwan Johnson because of where he's going. Like, I think there's tremendous value as he's kind of the forgotten tight end. And so if you're waiting on tight end, right, Travis Kelce, or you wait, like we talked about a few weeks ago, this is a guy who's a prime candidate to sit back and wait and snatch him up. Like, I think that he will hit those numbers or even surpass them this season. He's really started to come into his own here. All of last season and really the back end of 2 years ago. And he was a guy that we talked about when we talked about the Saints coming into last year, saying, hey, keep an eye out. Like, you may not like to draft him, but keep an eye out on the waiver wire. And if you did, that waiver wire panned out. He's getting into the end zone. He's a big body in the middle of the field. So it lets Olave, Michael Thomas, who whatever, kind of do the outside or some of the underneath stuff, while Johnson kind of gets on that back line of the end zone, and they're just playing pitch and catch at high point. So I'm okay with this. Is he going to be a, set it and forget it tight end? No, you're going to want another piece with it. But when the matchups are right and you're feeling it, he is absolutely serviceable in a platoon approach for your fantasy roster.
Yeah, and what you have to feel comfortable with was the numbers that he put up last year. I mean, those 42 catches on 65 targets. Like, he's catching the football when it's being thrown at him, right? Like, these are targets that are very, very useful. And the 7 touchdowns, even with the Taysom Hill problem, and we'll address that problem here next, but he still found the end zone 7 times. Like, that's pretty darn remarkable considering the weapon that is Taysom Hill, or I shouldn't say weapon, the touchdown vulture that is Taysom Hill down there in the red zone. So you have to like that. And again, to Kevin's point, like, yeah, he is not a set it and forget it, but he is a comfortable play more weeks than not.
Yeah, and this is a guy that has managed to find his way into the end zone with some not overly great quarterback play the last couple of years in New Orleans, right? Like, Andy Dalton's not the answer for, just about any team out there. There's a reason that he keeps moving along and finding new pit stops there. But Juwan Johnson's a guy I've got on several dynasty rosters, and I'm very happy with what that has turned into and where that's looking and the trajectory going forward on that. As far as redraft goes this year, absolutely. Like, I love this guy as a late round, deep, the late round tight end and playing that game there, because he will give you a bunch of kind of blow up type of performances on this one. Games where he could potentially come down with 2 touchdowns when it's all said and done. Like, this is a guy that can absolutely tear it up for you. Had several finishes last year where he was tight end 2 on the week, had a couple more tight end 4s, tight end 5. Like, this is a guy that's going to get a bunch of play here and be able to be a guy that's going to return some value for you on a streaming tight end candidate. So absolutely love that pick and love where he's coming off the board at, because he's coming off the board tight end 18. Sign me up for Juwan Johnson. Moving on there. All righty. Let's talk about Taysom Hill, the vulture of touchdowns, tight end number 5. 9 receptions, 13 targets, 77 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He averaged all of 0.8 targets per game. Thoughts on the tight end Taysom Hill?
What we don't have there are his rushing numbers, which is something you talk about often with a tight end, right? His rushing numbers last year, 96 carries for 575 yards and 7 touchdowns.
And almost 600 yards on the ground too.
Like so, man. Like, how? First off, what a nightmare for dynasty or for fantasy football platforms is where to classify this guy. Right? I was one of those guys back in the COVID year that was using him as a quarterback, or getting points of him as a quarterback in my tight end spot. Like, I was that guy. Game the system, right? So. So how are they going to use Taysom Hill this year is the big question. Like, do we see anything different? They brought in a Foster Moreau, right? Like, listed on the depth chart right now, Taysom Hill's the 3rd tight end. But is he actually a tight end, or is he just a gadget play running back that steals touchdowns? I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it. I really do. I really do. I would take Taysom Hill. I don't know that I like Taysom Hill with where he's going.
I'm going to hold you to that in August when we're drafting.
Oh, well, I'm not sure I appreciate where he's going right now. And I'm trying to look it up here. Why can't I find his name? The eyes just aren't working.
I'm going to tell you,
20th?
Tight end, not a freaking 20? Chance.
Thank you.
Like, best ball, yes. Yes, I will take the flyer in best ball. Because the weeks he goes off, he's absolutely a difference maker. But I mean, 1, 2, 5. He had 5 weeks at tight end 10 or higher.
Yeah.
Well, what do you do in the other 13 weeks?
It's fair.
12 weeks, whatever. Like, what are you doing there? 48, 48, 48, 41, 37, 28.
I'm starting Juwan Johnson those other weeks.
Yeah, right?
Like, I mean, but that's part of what's difficult, right? And they've had to use Taysom Hill because Michael Thomas has been out. They've had to use Taysom Hill because they didn't have Alvin Kamara running efficiently, and they didn't have anyone in the red zone who could punch it in, since Kamara was only getting like 3.6 yards a clip. Like, they've had to make some of these adjustments that maybe if things fall in correctly, they don't have to. They have Jamal Williams. They have Michael Thomas back. They have A.T. Perry. That's kind of a deep wide receiver look. Like, you have some other options that they're working on here. In best ball, yes, but I'm not drafting Taysom Hill to fight the highs and the lows and try and play matchmaker on us. Screw that. Screw that. Like, if I'm waiting on tight end, I'm not waiting on Taysom Hill. I will go Juwan Johnson. I will look at a different route and Greg Dulcich. I will look at other options and go Noah Fant, because at least I know Fant's going to see 6 targets a week, 5 targets a week, whatever that is. Like, I can at least count on that. He may not have the peak that Taysom Hill has, but in a bye week or something like that, I know Noah Fant's going to get me, 5 points. But Taysom Hill, he'll get me 41, or he's going to get me 1. Like, I don't like that. I don't like that. I am risk adverse when it comes to this, and so for that reason, I'm out. No, thank you. Move on. Someone else can have him. Good for you. Good luck. Not me. Not doing it.
Yeah. So Taysom Hill.
It's so intriguing.
Tim Tebow at tight end, for Christ's sake. Like, the polarizing figure for sure. And there's nothing wrong with the guy. I just don't want the headache on my fantasy roster.
Well, and it's funny enough, I actually picked up Taysom Hill in the home league and then traded him away for something, and I felt like I got a whole lot of value on this. But if nothing else, right? Like, this is Taysom Hill is the exclamation point on the point that we make that the tight end position outside of Travis Kelce really is touchdown dependent. And that's it, right? Like, you have a guy that had 13 targets and 77 yards, right? Like, throw the outside, realistically, outside of Travis Kelce, take the receptions, take the targets, take the yards, throw them out the window. Does your tight end fall into the end zone on a weekly basis? If he does, you had a great week out of your tight end. And if he doesn't, you had a very poor week. Like, that's if nothing else, the exclamation point that Taysom Hill put on that point that we've made over the years, right? Like, Evan Ingram went out and had one of his best years he's had out of his entire career, and Taysom Hill outpointed him by about 1 point total, right? Like, over the course of the season, Taysom Hill put up more points than Evan Ingram, and Evan Ingram actually, put up a very, very respectable stat line to it. And it was all because Taysom Hill managed to fall into the end zone, running the ball and vulturing those touchdowns from the running backs. So
I think I could list 30 tight ends I would draft before Taysom Hill.
Well, that's about 6 more than the average draft position puts him at, because he's coming off the board at tight end 24 for some reason. I'm in the same boat that you are. I'm not wanting to draft this guy, and I'm not wanting to spend the roster spot on it. I'd rather have the fun of playing an actual tight end in the position and seeing what I can do there, right? And I'd rather take the tight end late approach and stream tight end to do it, because that's all you're going to have to do anyways, stream tight end. And guess what? The matchups are harder to predict that Taysom Hill is going to fall into the end zone, and they're going to, allow him to run the ball 4 times, and he's going to get 2 touchdowns off of 2 of those run sweeps. Like, no, thank you. I'll move on, and I'll not draft him. But for those that you want to, good luck. Any other thoughts on this one?
No, move on.
Derek Carr coming over in the offseason, QB 17, 305 completions, 502 attempts, 60.8% completion, 3,522 yards, 24 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 24 rushes, 102 yards. Thoughts on Derek Carr?
I feel like these numbers should improve. I really do. Like, I think that he's going to be asked to do some different things in New Orleans, but I think it's going to be things that help Derek Carr. Like, first things first, we don't want 14 interceptions, right? Like, we got to find a way to get that down to 11 or less. Like, we just don't want 14 interceptions. Number 2, I need a completion percentage that's 63% or higher. Like, we got to find a way to get that completion percentage up. Now, you do those 2 things, and he goes from quarterback 17 and damn near to quarterback 12, just off of those 2 things.
Yeah.
Because with that completion percentage going up, now you're looking at something probably along the lines of 3,800 yards instead of 3,500 yards. You're able to put some more points on the board as a team, and you kind of move through that. So I like Derek Carr. I'm okay with Derek Carr as a QB2 in Superflex leagues. You can be a backup for me in redraft leagues. Anthony Richardson. If you're drafting Anthony Richardson, Derek Carr is not a bad plan B, right? Yeah. If Richardson just kind of craps the bed, and that same kind of difference. Derek Carr's not going to run the ball. He's going to air it out a little bit more. Richardson's probably not going to throw it, but he's going to use his legs and be a cheat code. So I like that. I like Derek Carr. I like the Chris Olave connection. I think he'll be able to work with Michael Thomas, Juwan Johnson. He has familiarity featuring a tight end because of his time with Darren Waller. All these things speak well to most of the Saints offense. So all that said and done, I'm going to tell you he's quarterback 14 at the end of the season.
Yeah, I like him to improve just based on the fact that he's got more weapons around him, right? And even if he only gets a half season of Alvin Kamara, if they use him in the passing game like they should, those are free. That's free passing yards there, right? Like those are free points. It's just like when you look at what the Raiders were last year, with Derek Carr, they were very top heavy is not the word I want to use, but like it was very tunneled into one person really carrying the load in each position group, right? Like Josh Jacobs really carried the load running the football. Likewise, receiving the football, it was predominantly Davante Adams, right? Like Mack Hollins and Foster Moreau and Josh Jacobs all combined didn't even get to what one of Davante Adams did in terms of yardage, right? So that's it,
and he didn't play the last two games last year also, right? Like
right.
He would have had, most likely, he would have had over 4,000 yards passing. He could have gotten up to, we'll call it 28 touchdowns. Maybe not quite 30, 28 touchdowns.
Yeah, he would have been pushing. I mean, he's 35-22. He would have been pushing 4,000 yards, right?
So maybe he is. Maybe he is a top 12 quarterback, right? Because that would have put him, those numbers alone would have jumped him from 17 to 14. So maybe he is making that push, top 12, top.
You'd have to think
11.
that he would tack on two more touchdowns in each of those games, probably another interception in each of those games. So, like that's where you're at in terms of his stats. An interception and a half, maybe. But yeah, like I like to think that he would have no reason to not be in that QB1 conversation, just based on the weapons that he has around him down there in New Orleans. So I like what you were saying, Kevin. If you go out and if you're in a 2-quarterback league, you go out and get an Anthony Richardson. Derek Carr is a great insurance policy to have as your second quarterback because he's a steady Eddie. And while you can have some highs and lows with a young quarterback like Richardson, you can pretty much know what you're going to get out of Derek Carr, and it's going to be elevated from what last year was based on the weapons that he has. So I think he finishes in that QB1 conversation. 14 is a really good number. If you had to give me an over under, I would have a really, really hard time trying to figure out which way I would go on that. But it will be very close that he will be in QB1. So in redraft leagues, go get Derek Carr. Single quarterback redraft leagues, there's only 11 guys better than him, or 12 or 13 guys better than him. So go out and get him at the right spot. And in 2 QB leagues, he for sure needs to be on your roster, like on a roster in the league. And if he's at the right spot, go get him.
Yeah, I like Derek Carr to be kind of that QB 13, 14 when the season's all said and done. He just came off of what could arguably be his second worst season that he's had as a professional, outside of his rookie year, right? Like,
with a lot of external forces too,
right? With the coaching change having taken place, a new wide receiver set. His two main pass catchers the previous 2 years weren't healthy all season. Like, yes, there was a lot of noise, a lot of stuff in the system there. And quite frankly, I think the Raiders kind of did him dirty when it was all said and done there. But again, go ahead.
And let's be real, like the Raiders were in a lot of games last year. Like I said, earlier in the show, the Raiders were in a lot of games. There was a lot of 1-score games. They went to overtime 4 times last year. So they were in a lot of games, and good reason for that is because of the play of Derek Carr.
Right. And so there's no reason that I can't see him getting back up to the 66, 67, 68% completion percentage we've seen him just deliver year in, year out over the last few. I don't see any reason we can't see him over 4,000 yards and get, again, middle of the 20s when it comes to touchdown passing. Probably low double digits on interceptions, right? So call it a stat line somewhere around, I think, 67% completion percentage 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. I think that's kind of where we see him doing. I think that's going to be enough to put him right there, QB 13, 14 when it's all said and done. So, yes, Derek Carr is a guy that a lot of people are going to overlook and guys are going to sleep on come this draft season, especially in Superflex. Put him on your roster, move on, and I think he'll do some really, really good things for you. Anyway, that's any other thoughts here on the Saints or the Derek Carr?
No, sir.
All righty. Alex.
I'll petition that we take a punt again on the question. We've been teasing this question for a couple of weeks here, but I'll petition that we punt on it.
The executive decision had already been made that we were kicking that next week. So anyway, that's the executive decision already happened on that one. Petition is squashed. Anyway, we're going to move along and just bring the final thoughts here. And that's we're going to call it a night here, and we'll hit up that topic next show here. But guys, what are the final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
Yeah.
It's been a long show. Thanks for hanging out with us and listening to us.
Yeah.
It's been a long show, but it's been a great show. These are good teams that I'd say we're good teams, but there's good fantasy pieces in these teams that we were talking about. So we hope that you can take something away from it.
Yeah. Like, subscribe, hit us up if you need any help. We enjoy interacting with everybody. So thanks again for tuning in, and until next week.
Absolutely. And I love the banner in the chat there. Love you guys interacting on that one. Just with the format of these shows, we don't necessarily get to hit those up as much as we would love to in the back and forth, but appreciate everybody going through on that one. And we'll throw that out there. We're going to be getting another kind of best ball league going here over on the Sleeper. You know where to find us across all the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, at Good Old Boys FF. Hit us up with your Sleeper handle, and we'll maybe send you a little invite to a best ball league with the Good Old Boys there. So hit us up. You know where to find us. Kevin already said it. Hit that subscribe button on the YouTube. That's the best way to support this independent podcast, youtube.com/@GoodOldBoysFF. Hit that subscribe button. That's going to do it for us. He's Kevin. He's Alex. I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe. And, of course, toodle-de-loos.